Today's webinar is titled Managing the Virtual Workplace, Best Practices to Achieve Effective Collaboration. Our presenter is Dr. Joy Olabisi, Assistant Professor of Management in the Saunders College of Business. Dr. Olabisi's current research interests include understanding how organizations learn and manage knowledge, especially through the effective utilization of teams. She is particularly interested in team performance, especially within virtual and project-based contexts. She is also interested in social entrepreneurial initiatives within emerging markets with a social embeddedness and networks emphasis. Dr. Olabisi's work has been published in peer-reviewed journals and conference proceedings, and she has presented her research at numerous domestic and international conferences. She teaches courses in the areas of management and international business. In 2015, she received the Saunders College of Business Exemplary Performance in Teaching and Student Impact Award. She was also nominated for the 2012 Provost Award for Excellence in Teaching. Dr. Olabisi received a master's and a doctorate degree in industrial and operations engineering with a concentration in engineering management from the University of Michigan. She also holds a Bachelor of Science in Industrial Engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology. And a note to you, our audience, Dr. Olabisi's presentation does include a video, and we want to let you know that the visual part of the video may play a little less smoothly than the audio. That's the nature of the WebEx system, and we do apologize for that and ask that you please be patient with our technical limitations. Joy, thank you for joining us today. Let's get started.
Thank you very much, Lydia. As Lydia mentioned, I'm on the faculty here at RIT at the Saunders College of Business, and I'm very excited to be with you this afternoon, and please feel free to ask questions as they come up. One of my research interests is work teams, how they develop, how they learn, how they manage knowledge, and assign tasks within the team. In my dissertation work some years back, I studied international ad hoc teams that were tasked with developing a prototype to solve a distinct environmental problem. The teams were based in the US, Germany, and South Korea. Although the teams were comprised of members who were technologically savvy, and teams were required to have weekly video conference meetings, we still encountered some surprising findings about virtual collaboration. Our general observations, both expected and unexpected, piqued my interest in understanding what it takes for virtual teams to collaborate effectively, especially given that organizational work is increasingly incorporating this idea and moving in this direction. So I'll be sharing some of those best practices with you today. So today, here's our presentation overview for today's talk. I'm going to be discussing the current state of virtual work and just a brief description about what we mean by virtual work. Virtual work is any work that relies primarily on technology to accomplish tasks. So this includes virtual teamwork. This also includes when one does a considerable amount of work remotely. So we'll be looking at some interesting facts and statistics about the current state of virtual work. We'll also be discussing some of the perils of virtual collaboration and some strategies to navigate those perils. We'll look at team member roles and what that tells us about what people should focus on while on teams to help improve collaboration. We'll discuss ways to remain engaged while being geographically dispersed. And then we'll look at a couple emerging trends in virtual collaboration. Some surprising, but some of these trends we'll talk more about. I'd like to start with a brief video titled A Conference Call in Real Life. This is a bit humorous, and I think many of you might be able to relate to this.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Trip Crosby
has joined the meeting.
Beth
has joined the meeting.
Hello?
Tyler?
No, this is Beth from ICS.
Oh, hey, Beth. How are you doing?
Oh, good. Yeah, just making it,
Tyler?
has joined the meeting.
All right, well, this is Tripp. Who's here?
Tyler's here.
Beth's here.
Okay, the purpose of today's meeting is to discuss the...
Yeah, I'll be able to do it in like 30 minutes. John?
Has joined the meeting.
Hi, John. Hi. I was just trying to go over the purpose of today's meeting, which is to discuss the
Tyler?
Has joined the meeting.
Sorry, guys, I got cut off. Is Paul here? Send him the invite.
Put in your access code.
No, that's your PIN number.
It should be a 9-digit number.
Try pressing the pound key. Paul.
Has joined the meeting.
Any questions before we move on?
Yes, this is Beth. What's our best plan of attack for the second quarter?
Question actually...
We should do...
Oh,
go ahead. Oh, well, I think what we should do
it actually
really
depends on
diversify,
how you look at it.
and really come...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think given sales, we're at
Let me just say that.
Okay.
That was a great graph, John. Tyler?
Well, my main concern with the projections from year was that they're just insufficient. I mean, they're not even taking into account.
Did we lose Tyler again?
Hello?
John, are you guys taking distributions? John?
Oh, my bad. I was on mute. Let me start over.
So I prepared a presentation. I'm sharing it with all of you. You should be able to see it on your screen right now.
Got it.
I don't see a link anywhere.
It says I need to download a plug-in.
We are all using Macs, I'm assuming?
Yeah.
How can you, of course?
Financials are looking great. Paul, do you have any comments on staffing?
I was thinking about that because we get a few more contractor types in. Hold on, I'm sorry.
I don't know. I feel like when I looked at the numbers last quarter, that you couldn't really tell a huge difference. So if we were to really tighten that up, then
To me, staffing is a huge impact. Is that me?
That's not me, I don't think.
I just want to go over a couple of details as we move into our next section here. We got 3 new departments coming on board. We're breaking up a little bit, guys. By the end of Q3.
Driving to the death
I need
spot.
everyone to give me detailed evaluations each month so that we know. That's it, guys. Beth, you'll send out a recap email that could have basically taken the place of this whole meeting, correct?
yep, always do.
Yeah, thanks for doing that, Beth. Dave, you been here the whole time?
Yeah.
Huh. Well, thanks everyone once again. Oh, one more. Hey, Tripp and Tyler here, and we just want to say.
Okay, many of you can probably relate to the experiences of the characters in the video. According to a study conducted by Culture Wizard, between 80 to 90% of white-collar employees of multinational companies conduct at least part of their work virtually. This study went on to find that while the vast majority of these people encountered challenges in virtual work, only about 15% of them had any kind of training to prepare for these challenges. And we saw that evident in the video that we just watched. And so we're talking about some of the strategies that one can employ to overcome these challenges in today's presentation. Which brings us to our first polling question. Does your job give you the opportunity to work from home in some capacity? That's full-time or part-time. If you can say that a substantial part of your work is done virtually, please select yes or no. Okay, so it looks like out of those that responded, 36% are saying yes, and okay, 36% are saying yes. All right, which I think actually aligns with some of what we're finding about the current state of virtual work, and I'm going to be sharing some interesting facts and statistics. Right now, about 25% of the American workforce says that they work from home at least part-time. So the statistics from the short sample in this webinar actually reveals that it's higher than that. More than 80% of U.S. workers would like to telework at least part-time. So we see that about 4 out of 5 people are wanting the opportunity to work remotely, at least in some capacity. 86% of surveyed individuals prefer to work alone to hit maximum productivity. And we're finding that in some of these high percentages, aligned with these high percentages, about 70% of millennials say the option to work remotely would increase their interest in specific employers. And so many are actually favoring that opportunity over higher salaries. About close to 90% feel more connected through the use of video conferencing, and so we're seeing the role that technology plays in connecting these individuals. Again, upwards of 80 are saying that they report lower stress levels. So companies that let people work from home save money both on office spaces, furniture, stress-related support systems, and the workers themselves are less likely to switch jobs and tend to be more productive and happier as well. So generally speaking, we're seeing that these findings align with a study by the World Economic Forum that showed that virtual teams, including flexible work, is indeed one of the biggest drivers of transformation in the workplace. We're seeing it happening everywhere. Yet we're seeing that people are not as equipped to do so effectively. And in spite of this increase that we're seeing with the statistics that we just shared, it doesn't come without challenges. And so we're going to look at some of the challenges affiliated with virtual work. The first is one that many of you who have experienced some type of virtual work are probably very familiar with, and that's the lack of frequent nonverbal face-to-face communication, as well as the lack of social interaction. So it's often said that 90% of communication is nonverbal, which many of you are probably familiar with the statistic. And the essence is you miss out on the emotional part of communication exchange when you're interacting virtually. The emotional components that actually reinforce what people are saying verbally, people miss out on in nonverbal communication. And many of you would also agree that you enjoy valuable social relationships with your coworkers. Such social interactions may include office banter, lunch, coffee, or happy hour with colleagues. And these social engagements are in jeopardy with individuals that conduct a significant part of their work independently and with minimal social interaction. So just a brief story about that. My brother works for one of the tech firms in Silicon Valley and was based there for some years, but decided to relocate to the South, to Atlanta, after they started a family, and they've got family in the South, and so they wanted to be closer to grandparents and things like that. So the company he was working for allowed him to keep his job and just said he should fly in every month for about a week because the team he was working with was still based primarily in the Bay Area. And so he's been doing that for about 3 years now, loves his work, loves the people he works with. So I asked him the other day, about 2 months ago, whether or not he sees himself doing this long term, given how much he values it. And he says he really, really loves the work, but he doesn't know if he can be in this consistent 1 week a month traveling situation, 3 weeks a month, not really engaged with anyone, just working independently, somewhat in isolation, on tasks that he's very much motivated to do, but is very much missing that critical interactive component. So we're social beings, essentially, and working in a situation where you're not interactive and not engaged with others, one can do, but is that sustainable is the question, and that might depend on your personality. And so another challenge is that if you're going to be working internationally or working collaboratively virtually, you have to learn how to manage yourself. If you work remotely, the manager that you deal with most of the time is yourself. And self-motivation becomes extremely critical. And so, when you're working independently, there are no supervisors or coworkers that can physically, immediately impact your productivity. And so you have to be extremely self-motivated. At the same time, some people, although these people might be in the minority, have admitted that they may be too productive when working independently. and not take enough time to stretch or recalibrate. There's no set sort of 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 time frame. You find yourself working around the clock. And so you have to be extremely dedicated in managing yourself. Another challenge is, and one that we're probably all very familiar with, is that it's harder to avoid distractions when you're working remotely. Getting that third cup of coffee, kids, pets, Amazon, distractions at the coffee shop if you're working at a coffee shop, doing sort of a side business that you might be involved with. So many things that may be less of a distraction when you're not working remotely and you're in an office becomes harder to overcome. Another challenge of working remotely from an organizational perspective is that it's been correlated to impact innovation and creative problem solving. So when working remotely has led to reduced innovation and problem solving. Innovation and problem solving experts will point to nominal group techniques where people have to be physically co-located to bounce ideas off each other and to brainstorm, and other iterative and interactive approaches that actually stimulate innovative thinking. Creativity at the famous tech creative giant IDEO will acknowledge the significance of collaborating in an integrated manner in order to generate creative solutions. Working remotely can be counter to that. You're not working with others, you're not having the opportunity to bounce ideas off between each other, and so that can stifle creativity and innovative thinking. And then lastly, it can be challenging to actually balance the remote working trade-offs. Just like we've discussed, as with many initiatives, there are trade-offs. Virtual collaboration, as we saw in the previous slide with interesting facts and statistics, is becoming increasingly popular and increasingly preferred way of getting things done. Yet, there are many challenges that must be overcome, as we've just discussed in this slide. So overcoming these obstacles is not about having the right tools or the right collaborative technology, because we're getting to a state where most people are technologically savvy, but it's about effectively managing the nuances of the virtual environment. And we'll look more into these nuances in the rest of this discussion. So I'll pause now to see if there are any questions.
We have one question,
Sure.
Joy, and that is that the research that you referenced at the beginning seemed to talk a great deal about the preferences of individual workers. Is there research that talks about the preference that's driving company decisions? So I'm interpreting that to mean the preference of the employers or the corporate leadership.
Not that I'm aware of. I know the corporate leaders tend to be more responsive to what motivates and what causes their employees to be more productive. There's some surveys that have actually interviewed employers about whether or not their employees are more productive if they're working virtually. So there's a lot of emphasis on the productivity and the preference of the employees. We'll talk towards the end about what's happening at the corporate level. So hold on for that. So that might answer your question at that point, but we'll talk more about that at the end. Okay. All right, let's move on. So the first question that I want to sort of discuss is how you navigate the perils of collaborating across time and space. And we're going to be talking specifically about strategies for collaborating in this virtual environment. The term just finished. We just had graduation this past weekend, and I just finished facilitating a virtual cross-cultural project that I collaborated on with 4 other professors. So my students and their students were put on teams, and these were about probably close to 100 teams of 3 to 4 students. Some of the students were located in RIT Croatia, and the others were at RIT and then another institution in Michigan. So looking at some of the cultural factors as well. But some of the key points that emerged, our findings which we're beginning to look at, actually aligns with these strategies that I'm going to be talking about. And I'll give some insights from this project in support for these strategies. So the first strategy is speaks to technology. You know, as we've talked about, technology is a huge driver of virtual and remote work. And there often seems to be a move towards trying to find the best technology and what has the best features. And what we're finding is that the best doesn't always mean going with the newest or most feature-laden technology. What works best is what works for everyone. So find what works for everyone and stick to it. That may mean being willing to sacrifice some of the features to achieve reliability, making sure everyone's on the same system, especially for global collaborations and global virtual teams where IT accessibility may be inconsistent, although this is less of an issue than it was maybe a decade ago. And so the team has to struggle to get connected or waste time making elements of the collaboration suite work, then it undermines the whole endeavor of collaborating virtually. So an example from the project that we ran is that some of the students prefer to use WhatsApp, some students prefer to use GroupMe. Some teams spend the first week arguing over what tool they should use to actually collaborate. When in reality, sometimes flexibility might be what's important. If majority of the members are using one particular tool or software, and you're the one member who needs to be flexible and adapt to what everyone else is familiar with, then that might be what's necessary. But finding what's comfortable for everyone to use so that you don't have to overcome technological hindrances is key. Another important strategy is to establish norms and routines. And this might seem like an obvious point to make because it's something that's not necessarily stated in more face-to-face or co-located teams. Again, we talked about the nonverbal communication that can reinforce some of these practices in face-to-face teams. In virtual teams, there has to be a lot more explicit communication. And this means being clear about policies and meeting times and durations and essentially norms about how things will run, and being clear about having clear agreements across members about what practices will be put in place. So in the project that we just ran, and actually in many of my team projects, not necessarily virtual projects, but just team projects as a whole, I usually ask my students to develop a team contract that addresses these norms and best practices for logistical processing within the teams. And initially, many students tend to think that writing a team contract is unnecessary, but it turns out that they're later glad that they did because it addresses some of these issues. It preempts these issues that may come up and addresses it head on and provides actually a guideline for me to use as a professor when they encounter some challenges. And then lastly, being able to capitalize and utilize cultural diversity. And so the reason why virtual teams are becoming more prominent, one reason why they're becoming more prominent is because you can have the best individual from a skill perspective contribute to a team regardless of where that person is. And increasingly, that person is now being located anywhere globally. And while homogeneous teams or less diverse teams tend to be more compatible and more cohesive at the beginning, diverse teams and more culturally diverse teams tend to be more productive and creative in the long run. And so being able to accommodate the cultural differences, emphasizing and encouraging an understanding of the cultural differences by sharing cultural customs with the team, maybe developing individual team profiles of each team member. In the project that we just did, we actually had the members, because there were some members from RIT Croatia, and many members who are even in the US-based teams that are not originally from the US. So many of the teams were actually quite diverse culturally. And we had the members do a simple Hofstede analysis to see where a team member's country fell with regard to Hofstede's cultural dimension. So looking at individualism and collectivism or power distance, just having a sense about where people are coming from. That can help better navigate some of the challenges that may come up in understanding some of the cultural nuances. So that's an important thing that I'd like to emphasize. So these are the three key findings that I think people can, in working in team settings, in virtual team settings, can preempt and to better prepare for, because these tend to come up quite a lot.
Can you, Joy, I'm sorry, can you explain, maybe I missed it, the time zone burdens across team members?
Yes, and that's actually a good one. So it's rare that a team will have an equal number of members in different time zones. What tends to happen to be more the case is in a team of 4 or 5, you'll have a majority of the team members in one time zone, the minority in another time zone. And the majority tends to drive the decisions. So you oftentimes will have meeting times that are preferable for the majority of the team. RIT Croatia, for instance, is 6 hours ahead. And so you're having meetings at 5 p.m., that's 11 p.m. Croatia time. So while 5 p.m. might be convenient for RIT or Eastern Standard Time-based students because they're done with all their work, that's when other students are getting ready to go to bed. And so, and we didn't address this ahead of time because part of the idea of the project was for them to sort of figure out some of these issues that may come up and figure out how to address it. But when you're in a team that has members from different time zones, it's beneficial and actually considerate to figure out ways that some team meetings can happen at times that are beneficial for all team members, not just a subset of the team. Does that address your question?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so if there are no other questions on some of these strategies, I'll move on to our next piece that we're going to talk about, which is the importance of team member roles in actively executing tasks and maintaining team cohesion. And with that, I think it's time for another polling question. So the question is as follows. As a virtual team leader, what's more important to focus on when working in teams? First, is it completing the team's task as quickly as possible? Or do you think focusing on the team members' socio-emotional needs is important? Or making sure the competition does not get ahead? I'll wait a minute and let you address those questions. Okay, let's take a look at the results from the poll. So about 35% of you said that the socio-emotional and consensus building is important, while about 14% said the team task was important. I don't think anyone said the last one was important. that was a tricky one. And no one fell for it, which is good. So most of you who answered B are correct, and we'll talk about why that is. Research has shown that virtual teams who have a leader that's supportive, so focusing more on well-being and achieving consensus, tend to have greater trust and increased participation than teams that have a leader where the leader is more authoritarian or focused on results. Again, that seems a bit counter to what we know about with teams, where the focus is on actually getting things done and executing tasks. Generally speaking, teamwork is often viewed, research views teamwork as two main components: task execution and maintenance management. So managing the team and managing the people within the team. So we'll talk about the first one because task execution is important. We're not saying it's not important, we're just talking about what tends to be more important. Task execution are functions that help team members actually get the work done. Again, as I mentioned earlier on, this is why many virtual teams are formed, is to bring people together to actually get the work done. There's an overwhelming emphasis on task execution. And this includes plethora of things, from designing the problem to actually executing the problem, coming up with processes to intermediate processes to execute the problem. Once the problem has been solved, doing after-action reviews to evaluate how the process went. So all of this is calculated around the idea of task execution. Some examples of this execution component of teamwork can be seen in Belbin's team roles. Dr. Meredith Belbin is a team expert that has studied team roles for many years. And in his famous study, he's identified 9 roles that tend to underlie team success. And a subset of these he called action-oriented team roles. And these action-oriented roles align with task execution. So these are people who are focused primarily on the task itself. And again, begin to think about individuals, whether or not you or other individuals on teams that you're a part of right now are aligned with these particular team roles. The shaper, one who tends to be more focused on overcoming challenges and obstacles and thrives on pressure. The implementer is a team role that tends to be more disciplined and tends to, as the term this is, implement ideas and turn them into practical outcomes. And the completer finisher are those who are conscientious folks, those who are time managers, who are focused on making sure we're meeting the deadline on time. So these, again, are all task-focused roles within a team. But what we're also finding is that there's more to teamwork than just accomplishing the tasks. And this is why the finding on virtual teams is surprising, which reinforces the fact that supportive well-being emphasis tends to lead to greater trust and participation than being more results-focused. So maintenance functions tend to hold the team together. These are the functions that overcome some of that deals with resolving conflicts, that leads to more cohesive members. This allows the team to have more fun. Now, many of you have probably been in teams where you accomplished the task quite all right, and you did so in a timely manner, but you probably would be okay if you never worked with those individuals ever again, because there was just a lot of conflict and a lot of mismanagement and a lot of chaos in the whole process of getting things done. For many teams that have to work on several projects consecutively and have to, build cohesion and collaborate time and time again, if the first project that they work on leads to this sort of unfavorable outcome, then it gets hard to keep working with these individuals that you don't really want to be around. And so we're finding that it's important to spend more time on this maintenance component and making sure that they develop clear processes for making sure people want to be a part of the team. And this is where the team contract that I mentioned earlier on plays a role in sort of making sure that individuals actually want to be with each other. So,
Joy, we do have a question
sure.
that's come in. The question is, the ultimate goal of a team is task execution, so isn't that the most important? Making sure your team is happy while you're accomplishing this task is secondary, but still important. Why would be the most important? It's just one aspect of getting the job done, which is the goal.
So getting the job done is the goal, and there's a sense that when teams come together, there's a shared awareness, a shared superlative goal that everyone has to get this done. And I'll talk more about that later when I talk about Swift trust. There's a sense that people are already bought into the idea that they want to get this done. In looking at how much emphasis is placed on the process, the well-being, the supportive environment, when less emphasis is placed on that, and that gives us back to the example that I mentioned earlier on, the task may get done quite okay, the end result may be met, but for long-term productivity and long-term sustainability of the team, placing more emphasis on making sure that the team, again, maybe having fun might not be the right, phraseology. You wanna have fun, but making sure that there's minimal conflict, making sure there's minimal interactive hurdles that a team has to overcome is being increasingly seen as important. The other thing that we're finding is that, especially in virtual environments, teams tend to be more self-led. So when teams are more self-led and you've got this idea of shared leadership playing a role, then participation and trust become driving factors of leading to important team and effective team outcomes more so than making sure you're checking the boxes that everyone's doing their task. Because I don't know how to say it, checking the boxes will happen because teams are already, individuals are bought into wanting that to be the outcome anyway.
Okay. A follow-up, over the last 20 years, we understand that there has been a shift in corporate philosophy or goal, a change from focus on high operational excellence, like the Jack Welch people, has given way to a desire for creative and innovative solutions and product development. Is that part of what is playing into this change from task orientation of a team to more cultural focus?
Absolutely, absolutely. So when Jack Welch left GE, Jeffrey Immelt was the CEO that came in after Jack Welch. And Jeffrey's big contribution was making GE, to use your example, more innovative focused. And innovation, as I mentioned earlier on, tends to develop from a lot of interactive idea generation, idea building, when individuals are able to feed off of each other. And that tends to happen when you're in a cooperative, collaborative environment, as opposed to a conflict, check-the-box type of environment. I'm not saying that conflict and checking the boxes are equivalent. Getting a task done is important. I want to emphasize that. If you don't get a task done, you're not going to meet your end result. So that's fundamentally important. But one of the ways in which tasks get accomplished potentially more effectively or potentially more efficiently is through exploring innovative ways of doing so. And this innovation is driven by having an innovative culture, a more collaborative and cohesive culture. And that's what we're seeing more emphasis being placed on now, exactly. Thanks for those questions. And so again, not to belabor the point that both are important, but we're seeing more emphasis on sort of this cohesive maintenance related components of getting the work done. All right, which brings us to our last question. How do you remain engaged within your teams? Why is geographically dispersed? How exactly do you remain dialed in and continue to build this cohesive environment when you're not seeing each other face-to-face on a consistent basis? And so our third polling question looks at this a bit more. And that's where you take a second to answer that question. True or false? It's important to meet with your virtual team members as often as possible. So true, face-to-face meetings are always beneficial. Or false, this can be quite costly and defeats the whole purpose of collaborating virtually. Okay, let me take a look at the results here. It looks like, ooh, this is a tight one, but half and half. So 9 said true, it's always beneficial. And maybe the word that threw you up there is always. Those tend to be tricky, true, false words. And then 8 of you said false, it is costly. So, The right answer is it's true. In spite of the technological advancements that have been made, in spite of the fact that it can be quite costly to meet face-to-face, current studies still show that meeting face-to-face as frequently as possible will still yield the best outcomes. You can't overcome that face-to-face interaction. And I'll elaborate on this a bit more. When I study the virtual teams on my dissertation, but also the teams that we just looked at, we always try to emphasize that teams should meet physically, and that could mean video conferencing. If physically it's not possible, but try to meet physically as early as possible. There are several studies on teams that have shown that if people are working on a project that has a set duration, maybe a 6-month duration, and the first time teams meet face-to-face is after the midway point, those teams are less successful than teams that meet face-to-face before the midway point. And so there's something about meeting early within the first couple of weeks that grounds the team members, that, again, allows the team members to build swift trust, which I'll talk about in a little bit, and allows the team members to get on the same page and to understand some of these cues and unspoken verbal communications that might emerge. And so meeting as early as possible is key. I can't emphasize that enough.
We have one question.
Sure.
Actually, we have 2 questions. The first one is, do you define face-to-face as actually physically being in the same room, or is video chat, FaceTime, Skype considered to be a face-to-face meeting?
We define face-to-face as physically, it's the physical face-to-face, and of course it's electronic face-to-face. So physical face-to-face is being in the same room. If that is not possible, which is often the case, electronic face-to-face is becoming an increasing preferable option if physical face-to-face is not possible. There's still some cues that one misses if you're electronically face-to-face that you would pick up on if you're physically face-to-face. Again, it depends on the duration of the project. One of the teams that I looked at several years ago with Ford, where they were working on a new model for, I think it was the Prius, and this was like an 18-month project, then yeah, it's important for you to meet physically face-to-face because you're in it for an 18-month haul. If the project duration is much less, if it's a matter of weeks or just a few months, then maybe electronic face-to-face will suffice. It depends on how large the team is as well. If the team is having to spend a lot of money to get everyone in the same place and you've got a lot of people, then you can certainly overcome that with electronic face-to-face meeting. But physical face-to-face is still ideal, if possible.
Which I think the second question, which is really a comment, explains that. The statement is that both answers in the polling question are true, but if some of your team is spread out around the world and I'm in California, then it's too costly.
Right.
It has to depend on the situation as to whether it's feasible to meet face-to-face.
Absolutely. Again, but best case scenario is that. And then regular face-to-face contact is also preferable. And again, if you're able to meet physically face-to-face initially, then I would say electronic face-to-face periodically after that would be fine. We actually, for this virtual project that we just ran this semester, we didn't mandate that the teams meet face-to-face electronically, definitely not physically, because that was not feasible. But we didn't mandate that they meet electronically. We strongly suggested that they meet electronically face-to-face. Many of the teams didn't, and looking back, even though they did make a team contract, many of them expressed that they wish they would have had a chance to have a chat face-to-face, electronically face-to-face. The teams that did kept emphasizing how valuable that was. So that's one way to stay engaged, is just you can't overcome that face-to-face component. Secondly, to create a virtual water cooler. So again, this goes back to the whole task and maintenance team that we talked about earlier on. Task-based teams, while focusing on the tasks, sometimes don't necessarily emphasize the sort of icebreaker type activities. This might be starting each meeting with a check-in, discuss what's going on, maybe ask a question that's not related to the task at all. And doing this repeatedly doesn't have to take a long time, because some can say that can be time intensive. It doesn't have to take a long time, but doing this repeatedly, members find that they begin to learn so much about each other, and it gives them some insight as to why individuals are approaching a task the way that they are. And so we find that, you know, having some of these informal interactions during meetings can also help people stay engaged. And that also, I think, is tied in with the third bullet point there, where I say, you know, use for team building exercises. These tend to be very popular in a co-located setting. There are also some that exist in virtual settings that you can do. And then lastly is this idea of swift trust. So trust is, I think we all understand what trust means. Swift trust is a concept that applies primarily to virtual teams. So in Swift trust theory, a group or a team assumes trust initially, and they later verify or adjust the trust accordingly based on whatever is being reinforced. So when groups first form, people are willing to give each other the benefit of the doubt. And this happens more so in virtual teams, because there's a sense that everyone is wanting to do it for the best interest of themselves. There's a feeling that we're in the same boat together. There's a feeling that success will reflect well on everyone, and failure could hurt some people's careers. So this initial swift trust that exists, working hard to maintain it and to not be the weakest link, so to speak, can also help you stay engaged. And so with that, we move on to some of the emerging trends that we're seeing in virtual collaboration. And the first is, interestingly enough, whether or not we're going back to basics. And so we're finding that there seems to be a recent trend, particularly in struggling companies ranging from Best Buy a few years ago to Yahoo, and now IBM, who recently experienced several years of declining revenues, to make it a requirement to house employees near each other. And many of these, you know, leading companies will say that increased remote work has stifled creativity, as we talked about earlier on. And there's a sense that they need to change the culture and maintain an innovative mindset. And so the idea is to reunite people to better drive innovation. And so we're seeing companies that are reinforcing people actually coming into work and bouncing ideas off of each other, and just sort of being in an environment where they can be, you know, motivated and feed off of each other in executing their tasks. And being together can reinforce a desired culture. Organizational culture is oftentimes reinforced through coworker interaction, so cultural change and cultural strengthening is more effective when members are actually co-located. And the thing is, remote working is not for everyone. I think it's, as we talked about with the interesting facts earlier on, it's a movement that a lot of people are jumping on board with, but not every individual, not every company might be suited to utilize remote working. And if it's being abused, it can actually be taken away. Another way that we see companies bringing employees back to the office, if you will, is that they're increasingly creating very attractive work environments with the creative perks. So they're making work fun and convenient. You can drop your dry cleaners off at work. You can get massages at work. You can drop your kids off at work on an on-site daycare. They have on-site services and on-site meals. And so with a lot of these benefits and perks, it's easier to come into work and to sort of, you know, work while you're in that setting. And then, you know, of course, probably still work a bit more when you leave the setting, but you're more focused is the idea in work. And it's actually why many tech companies serve dinner at work. Many of the Silicon Valley companies serve dinner because people will say, should I leave at 5 or should I just stay another hour and get a nice, you know, nice cooked meal? So you get, you know, 7 more hours of productivity. And so again, we're seeing some companies choosing to really evaluate whether or not remote working is ideal. And then another emerging trend we're seeing is this idea of shared leadership, which I think I alluded to earlier on. The thing is that centralized power is less effective in a virtual environment, and virtual teams are coming together with each person having some of expertise, with each person who has the expertise, especially if jobs or projects are in certain phases of the process. Certain expert members can actually take on leadership roles during that phase. And so a recent study on virtual teams of a Fortune 500 global IT firm found that on teams that had a high degree of trust, power had actually shifted over the duration of the project, depending on whoever had expertise in that particular phase. And so we're seeing this idea of shared leadership and shared decision-making occurring within teams rather than sort of the single lone leader on a team. And then we're also seeing more overlap between task and maintenance roles, as we talked about. A current project that I'm working on is looking at the role of boundary spanners in cross-functional teams. And so the idea initially is that boundary spanners, or those who span across teams, tend to be more generalist and not necessarily have functional expertise. And what we're proposing is that boundary spanners can actually be functional experts while also managing more of these relationships and information exchange across teams. And so we're seeing sort of more of this multiple team membership and shared leadership and team environments in virtual collaboration. So that concludes the presentation this afternoon. In summary, we looked at the current state of virtual work, reviewing some current data, statistics, and also looking at challenges. We also looked at different strategies for navigating the perils of virtual collaboration, looking at team roles, focusing more on tasks and also maintenance being equally important. And then we also looked at ways to remain engaged when you are geographically dispersed, and specifically the importance of swift trust. And then current trends also are reevaluating whether or not virtual work and remote work is for everyone, and identifying, the fit of your organization or of you as an individual for remote work. And then lastly, the importance of shared leadership. So thank you for engaging with me, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
Yes, we do have a couple more questions here. One, we have been asked if we can provide some more resources on the Swift Trust. And I think what I would suggest is that when we share out Dr. Olabisi's presentation to everyone, the recording from this event, we'll get some links from her for that, as well as for the fun video that we showed, so you can see it without a little choppy visual component. But we will share those out with the recording. Second question, comment from one of our audience is that bringing employees back into the office has had a negative impact for most development teams. Progressive cube arrangements and other, quote, benefits have actually stifled development and creativity, contrary to popular opinion, because there's just too many people working on top of each other, engineers and other people who need private, quiet, alone time to be creative, as well as the, I guess we would call it the rise of the quiet people, the people who are not outgoing, not social. Yes, yes. So I think do you have comments or thoughts on that?
Yes, and I think the comment that I made, which is evaluating whether or not the fit is best for, and maybe it might be best for some segments of organizations. But I think the idea is trying to implement the practice across the entire organization or across an entire industry, where some industries might be better suited for remote working than others. Some individuals might be better suited for remote working than others. I think it would depend on the industry or maybe even the subset of the organization.
And interestingly enough, that was our last question here, which is, do you have research that shows that certain types of companies or certain industries are better suited to virtual teamwork, and what are a few of those?
We don't have, not to my knowledge. not to my knowledge, I think studies are being done in several different sectors and several different industries. It will be challenging to find, it will be challenging to surmise that certain industries are better for virtual work than others. I think you find pros and cons within all industries. But that's something that I actually would probably look more into and maybe send you what I find as well.
All right. Well, that is all the time that we have. We want to thank everyone for joining us today. Any additional questions that you have can be emailed to ritalum@rit.edu or tweeted to @RIT_alumni with the hashtag #MeRITWebinars, and we will direct your questions to Dr. Olabisi. Note that all participants will receive an email from us in the next few days with a link to today's webinar recording as well as some of those additional resources that we mentioned. Thanks again, Joy, for being our distinguished presenter today, and thanks to all of our listeners for participating in today's webinar. Our next MeRIT webinar will be Tuesday, June 5th. Please consider joining us for a presentation from Drs. Callie Babbitt and Eric Williams from the Golisano Institute for Sustainability. They will be discussing the, Golisano Institute for Sustainability, and the presentation is on the environmental impact of electronic devices and how you can help address this. We thank you all for joining us. Please exit the webinar by simply closing your WebEx window, and please let us know what you thought of the webinar by taking the very brief survey which pops up when you exit. Thank you and have a great day.